Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this HashiCorp webinar, where today we'll be exploring zero trust security for the UK public sector. My name is Connor Beechinor, and I'll be your moderator for this session. And today I'm delighted to welcome both Ben Holmes and Andre Pimentel, who are both on our solutions engineering team here at HashiCorp, and they'll be your speakers today. In terms of the agenda, we'll start with a quick overview of HashiCorp, who we are and what we do, before exploring the current industry landscape, the challenges that you're facing in the public sector, and how ultimately you can then implement a zero trust security strategy. We'll then wrap up with a live Q&A, so if you do have any questions, please post them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and we'll send that out to everyone via email after it's been processed, usually within the next 24 hours. So with that, over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Connor. Okay, so before we got started on the topic of zero trust itself, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time introducing HashiCorp as a company. So although many of you attending today may be familiar with one or two of our open source or enterprise tools, such as Vault or indeed Terraform, it's often the case that when we go out to speak to people, they're simply not aware of HashiCorp as a company. They've been using the tools for years, but they don't really know the wider context of how they've been created or who is creating and who is working in those communities. They download the project, they use the tool to support a specific workflow they have, but they aren't aware that HashiCorp turned 10 years old last year, or that we have nearly 2,500 employees. They may not know that we support nearly 3,000 customers globally across a wide variety of industry verticals, including public sector. They might be surprised to learn that we have approximately 100 million open source downloads annually. So there's a strong possibility that they're not the only person using a HashiCorp project within their organization today, as these tools have become pretty foundational for many critical workflows within small teams, within larger departments, or indeed whole organizations. Next slide, please, Andre. But why is this the case? What are we aiming to achieve here as a company? Well, when we say that we're enabling a common operating model, what we're really talking about is simplifying operations across your infrastructure providers, because when each infrastructure provider that you're working with has their own distinct and often proprietary tooling for basic interactions with their services, so no common approaches to provisioning, no common approach to security, to identity and access management, to networking, even to satisfying application runtime requirements, it's really incredibly difficult to achieve the operational efficiencies that cloud adoption should afford you. But in order to achieve this kind of common operating model, there exists the need for a single control plane to underpin each type of workflow you're looking to address, regardless of the infrastructure provider or providers that you might be using. Next slide, please, Andre. Thank you. And this is what HashiCorp provides with each of its products, that single control plane to underpin those workflows. So for provisioning, how do I provision, manage, and destroy my infrastructure components in a simple yet repeatable manner? Well, you can use Terraform to define your infrastructure as code and Packer to consistently create golden images that your IAC workflows depend on. For networking, if I've addressed my provisioning challenges, how can I ensure that the applications and services that I'm deploying that span both my data centers and my cloud environments can be permitted to discover each other and then to communicate with each other in a secure manner? This is where our networking and service discovery tool Consul comes into play. From a security perspective, in a low or zero trust and cloud-oriented landscape, how can I effectively manage my identities, encrypt my application data, and manage my secrets? Well, Vault can provide identity brokerage, and secrets management capabilities, and then Boundary enables secure remote access to applications and services wherever they might be hosted within your infrastructure providers. And then finally, from an application standpoint, we know that we operate in a world of heterogeneous application runtimes. And whilst there might be many commonalities in what we are deploying, I really have yet to find an organization that can succinctly agree 100% on how they want to deploy that thing. Are we going to do Kubernetes? Are we just running containers ourselves or via a managed service? Are we installing our applications as RPMs onto a Linux virtual machine? So how can we bring commonality and consistency to the implicit chaos there? Well, Nomad is a simple and infrastructure agnostic workload orchestrator, perfectly capable of managing both containerized and non-containerized workloads alike. And it's important to understand that our engineering philosophy is rather Unix-like in its approach here. We'll do one thing and do it well. So whilst these are not tightly coupled solutions and there's no interdependency between them at all, they absolutely will complement each other. And when you deploy them side by side, indeed, the approach to zero trust security that Andre will take us through in a little bit leans particularly heavily into these complementary capabilities and how you integrate them. But how can our tools and products be adopted at scale? Well, in established enterprise customers, we commonly work with the customer's platform team, so a group of engineers who are responsible for delivering shared infrastructure, runtimes, and other familiar cross-cutting concerns that enable the wider business to operate successfully. But bear in mind, however, that not everyone starts off with a platform team like demonstrated on this slide here. More often than not, customers' journey with HashiCorp will start off with an individual or a small group of individuals. The open source projects are often enough for them. They're looking at single workflows, and there's no real scale challenge present at that point. But as adoption grows, these individuals often become teams. They need better, more efficient ways to collaborate. They need a predictable cadence for their security fixes. They'll be looking for some formal enterprise support for their solutions. From there, the enterprise product may well become an organizational standard. It is the way to address a workflow challenge across an organization. So now the teams or the platform teams at this point will be looking for ways to enforce policy and governance for their users and to effectively secure and audit interactions as part of that workflow. They'll be looking at training options to ensure that they can make the best use of this product that they've invested time and money into. And they might also be looking for a closer relationship with named representatives at HashiCorp. So this is exactly how HashiCorp can grow our relationship with you to ensure that you get the value that you need from us at the time when you most need it. Next slide, please, Andre. Now, looking quickly at the industry challenges here, I think there are a number of core industry challenges that HashiCorp sees as it engages within the public sector market. What we present here is not an exhaustive list by any means, and I'm sure that you guys can think of others. However, there are challenges that are routinely raised in conversations with both our customers and open source practitioners operating within this vertical. So from the top here, COVID-19. It would be incredibly disingenuous to review the challenges affecting the public sector without looking at the effects COVID-19 has had on how the sector has been operating. It's an event that has had far-reaching effects on how people are working, how they're evaluating their professional priorities and expectations, and the professional mobility that has occurred as a consequence of that. And just as a side note, I think it's particularly interesting to note that according to the Commons Library Research Briefing published in August last year, private sector employment levels dropped by 1.3% during the pandemic, whereas public sector employment actually rose by 5.1%, although the devil is in the detail, and the actual numbers reflect a more complicated situation, given that the number of people employed by the private sector in the UK is about 5 times higher than the public sector. Still, it's an interesting trend to take note of, and one that's really worth keeping in mind as we work through this stuff. Following that, the almost overnight shift to remote working resulted in huge investments in cloud services, into automation and into remote working capabilities just to support those business as usual activities. Never mind new capabilities and services that needed to be brought on stream to support rapidly evolving public sector requirements. I mean, track and trace being the obvious example there. And organizations that never really had to conceive of remote working before suddenly had to deliver secure laptops, provision robust VPN solutions, adopt infrastructure solutions that weren't buried in air-gapped data centers, just to allow their employees to carry on working as if they were at their desks. Now, this shift to a remote-first methodology also meant that the talent pool for an organization became the entirety of the UK. An experienced practitioner in DevSecOps methodologies in, say, Newcastle could now get an almost London salary without any expectations of leaving the house. However, this also applies to the private sector. So even when the playing field is leveled in such a way, and despite the general trend towards increasing public sector employment levels, there really does continue to be a severe talent attraction and then retention challenge around technical expertise within the public sector. Of course, we have budget pressures. We're all very familiar with these. It should be self-evident that these investments in personnel, in infrastructure, and in supporting services will have come at a cost. In the current climate, you've got public sector organizations that really need to demonstrate how they are providing value to the taxpayer. set against the economic background of the UK's exit from the European Union and the impact on public finances based on other external factors, such as the aforementioned COVID-19 related spending, there's a real level of scrutiny on public spending at the moment. And so much so that as part of last autumn's statement in 2022, there was an efficiency and savings review launched, which will look at, and I quote, all the cross-cutting government functions and departments to drive up professional standards, accelerate progress on innovation and automation, and further reduce waste and duplication. And I think we can all agree that it will be naive to expect technology programs to escape scrutiny. And so HashiCorp, along with every other vendor or supplier in the public sector domain, must really continue to work collaboratively and effectively with our public sector counterparts to help them recognize cost and efficiency savings in the programs of work that they're undertaking and help them meet the requirements laid out by the UK government. And finally, from a cloud adoption perspective. Now, there was a UK government cloud first policy that was launched in 2013, and it's been reviewed sporadically and updated sporadically over the course of the last number of years. And the policy dictates that the government departments should consider and fully evaluate potential cloud solutions first before considering any other options. Now, this approach is mandatory for central government and strongly encouraged behavior within the wider public sector. However, prior to COVID-19, it's not really result in the massive take-up of cloud services that was expected, even with the oft-touted benefits of infrastructure modernization, of a shared responsibility model, flexible consumption, and economies of scale. I mean, according to G-Cloud purchasing data, central government has really been leading the charge here following that mandate, with a roughly 80-20 split between central government cloud spending and the rest of the public sector. And even taking pandemic-related spending into account, that ratio still remains broadly consistent. Just let that sink in for a moment. That's a huge discrepancy between central gov and the wider public sector in terms of cloud spend. So whilst this G-Cloud data does show that there's been a general trend towards increased cloud adoption, it's really hard to escape the fact that across the UK public sector, the cloud adoption itself has been pretty patchy, with a couple of large-scale consumers such as Home Office, HMRC, and DWP accounting for a significant percentage of that total cloud spend in central government all by themselves, right? Now, we see that there are common blockers to adoption raised, and these often include cost and long-term affordability of public cloud solutions, of security concerns with moving workloads into cloud, and ultimately the lack of skills and capabilities to migrate or develop and then provide onward support for services deployed into public cloud environments. So despite the mandate for a cloud-first policy, there's still a long way to go before the public sector becomes truly cloud native. Next slide, please, Andre. And this leads us to some common risks that we find associated with those challenges. So from a collaboration point of view, as we're all probably very well aware, historically, public sector organizations haven't been all that great at collaboration amongst themselves in the technical space. In some instances, even departmental sharing has been challenging. This has been highlighted by the relatively recent reinstatement of the UK Government CTO Council and the policy initiatives coming out of the Central Digital and Data Office. And this remains a kind of a meta risk to everything else that we've got listed here. And without that collaboration, there really is limited scope for the successful reuse of architectural patterns, of technology platforms, of security practices, and in general, the ways of working that drive success within the cloud adoption space. From a cost management point of view, organizations should always be cognizant of the costs when considering their future operating models. But this becomes especially relevant in a kind of hybrid or multi-cloud world. The flexibility of deployment options and awareness of service costs is key here to ensuring that an organization is able to choose technology and hosting providers of best fit for the services that they want to build, whilst ensuring value for money for the UK taxpayer. When we're talking about lock-in, I think in my experience, it's reasonable to say that organizations don't often set out to be hybrid or multi-cloud. It's something that tends to happen organically as both workloads and requirements evolve, departments merge or are separated out. But it's really easy to end up relying on a whole host of services from a single provider, making both data and capability egress a very real challenge for these organizations. And this can occur from both a commercial and a technical perspective, right? So you need to be aware of where your services are landing so that you can effectively evaluate your locking risk, ascertain what level of locking you're comfortable with, and then have options in place in case the services that you're consuming become untenable from either a commercial or a technical perspective. And this leads us on to data residency. According to the government's cloud guide for the public sector, there is no overarching government policy in place regarding data residency. Instead, the onus is really on the individual departments to make their own assessment as to the risks associated with the storage of government data on cloud storage services. However, there are a number of guidelines maintained by the Information Commissioner's Office on the topic, as well as the cloud principles set out by the National Cybersecurity Centre. But unless every department is implementing their solutions against these principles in a uniform and then repeatable manner, it's highly unlikely that a consistent approach to meeting the recommendations laid out by the ICA or the NCSC exists. Heritage infrastructure. This is a fun one. I refuse to call this stuff legacy because there's been a lot of time, effort, and money that's been invested in ensuring that existing infrastructure solutions are capable of providing valuable services to the customers that they're aimed at. However, the risk remains that with any kind of modernization or indeed digital transformation program, this journey can take longer for some organizations than for others, for example. And that cannot introduce operational continuity challenges, right? And the risks associated with potentially having and maintaining dual or multiple standards for security and data integrity that are appropriate for the respective domains. Of course, multiple sets of tools associated with the maintenance of different environments, both on-prem and in the cloud. And finally, from a security perspective, it's important for organizations and departments to assess their current and future operating models to understand their security obligations within the infrastructure that they choose to adopt to underpin their service, right? Much of that obligation relies on that specific organization or department understanding their security needs and then establishing a level of confidence that an infrastructure provider, whether cloud-based or on-premise, is secure enough to handle the data that's required to orchestrate through its services. Again, the NCSC provides specific guidance on establishing that confidence, but there will always be an inherent risk that security requirements are either understated and therefore have a potentially negative impact on the security and integrity of public-facing services, or indeed overstated, and therefore have a potentially negative impact on the costs and operational requirements associated with delivering those public-facing services. Next slide, please, Andre. And so we have this situation where many government departments are opening up their infrastructure due to the changes in working practices, engaging multiple cloud technology providers and embracing new and evolving ways of working in a manner that would have been considered untenable for them even 3 years ago, right? And it's therefore makes sense that they will then start to explore how they can move themselves to a robust security architecture so they can more effectively utilize these new technologies and capabilities whilst they're operating under a model where everything is authenticated and authorized, where they assume that a breach has already occurred, and that the principles of least privilege are adhered to across the estate. And that really is the crux of the zero trust security model. So how can we at HashiCorp help public sector organizations achieve this transition? Well, to help answer that question, I'd like to hand it over to Andre now. Andre, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Yeah, sorry, I'm not the best person to transition slides. Maybe, yeah, it was a bit glitchy. Sorry about that.
It's okay, right? Carry on.
Cool. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andre Pimentel. I'm a solutions engineer for HashiCorp. And today we're going to explore how we get organizations like yours to adopt the zero trust principles. So yeah, there's a chat, so feel free to use the chat for questions, but I'll leave a couple of minutes at the end for any questions you have. Okay, so Ben already did the introduction. Okay, we are basically the cloud operating company. Okay, we pioneer also in the principle of zero trust security in the clouds. Why are we the cloud operating company? Because we built Terraform, okay, which is the de facto infrastructure as code tool used by companies of all sizes to provision resources in the clouds. Okay, but today we're not going to talk about Terraform. We're going to talk about Vault, Consul, and Boundary. Okay, so first, let's talk about identity and what that looks like. Okay, so before, legacy identity was very simple. Much simpler than today. Okay, applications were secure based on a static IP. Okay, over trusted networks. So pretty much everything was static. Okay, there was typically one logging system for everyone, one logging system to rule them all, like AD, LDAP, or whatever, for users to access systems and resources inside your network. Okay, and we assume that everything was secure. We assume that yeah, it's trusted. Why? Because we are inside the castle, so you can see that strategy as being inside the castle with the moats around it. You feel safe inside the castle. You know everything. Infrastructure is static. Oh yeah, that VM over there, I know that for years. I maintained that VM for the last 8 years or so. And identity basically is trusting something that's inside the castle. So if you see a person walking around, oh, they're inside the castle, so it's fine. Someone is looking over your shoulder to see your laptop, that's fine. They're inside the castle, so it must be okay, right? So as you go to the multi-clouds, things are much more dynamic. And identity has become much complex with the explosion of so many applications, network components, and cloud-based systems. You can literally have hundreds of things to authenticate. Networks are across different networking hardware and software, so many different ways the users need to authenticate themselves. And also in two things. And the cloud vendors, they have their own IAMs and their own workflows. Yeah, so you really need an identity broker to unify identity for applications, networks, and users across all this new tech. So now we are in the open fields. Okay, we have these little tents scattered across the open fields. There's no trust perimeter. There's no moats anymore. And you really can't trust anything in the open fields. One little mistake could put you in a very dangerous situation. So why does it matter? You can see the metrics, they speak for themselves, okay? These breaches are increasing every year. Humans are at the heart of those breaches, whether by accident or bad actors. Different platforms and technologies are difficult to manage and scale. It's also very difficult to master everything. Someone knocks on your door tomorrow and then say, tomorrow you have to adopt Alibaba for some reason, or we are migrating everything to GCP, deal with it. And you're like, oh, I have no idea how to secure applications on GCP now. So yeah, it's very difficult to master everything. And the, let's say, cloud vendor specific processes, workflows, and IAM identities. The consequence, teams get siloed and they get no collaboration and vision. And this speaks for a better automation and security approach. So again, the shift from static infrastructure to dynamic infrastructure, the legacy approach falls apart. There is no trust perimeter, no trust access, and your data is insecure. Zero Trust at HashiCorp, we see this through the lenses of you must secure everything, apps, network, and people, based on identity. Basing everything on identity, everything is authenticated. Every action is authorized and data is always protected. So pretty much every application and service has a valid active identity. Every request is authorized for least privilege permissions, and data is always protected with encryption and rest in transit over the network. And the value of HashiCorp is to simplify everything. HashiCorp unifies all these different identities into a single platform, Vault, that will broker identity across applications, networks, and users across all cloud vendors and also technologies. So if you're using Vault, you're familiar with a lot of this, okay? But also this takes this idea through different identity platforms, whether for applications, networks, or people, and also having this concept of unified identity. So let's take a look again at the three pillars: applications, networking, and users. Application security, okay, is basically ensuring the applications can access other apps and databases. Who's responsible for that pillar is pretty much Vault, okay. Network security to ensure which service can access others or be reached, okay. We see that the responsibility will fall into HashiCorp Consul. And finally, user security, ensure which systems users can access. Okay, so this is gonna fall into HashiCorp boundary domain. Okay, so let's take a look at the 3 pillars in more detail here. First, Vault. Okay, Vault is the center of the Zero Trust security. Okay, it leverages trusted sources of identity to keep secrets and applications data secure. Okay, so we have authentication into any platform. Okay, we're not gonna rely on static credentials. We're gonna rely on identity. Okay, an application running in specific cloud vendor can use JWT to authenticate itself. A user will use AD. Pods running on the Kubernetes cluster will use the Kubernetes identity from the service account. Okay, basically there is no more static credentials floating around. Secrets also can be dynamic. Instead of relying on rotation, we're gonna request secrets on the fly. Vault will manage the life cycle of the secrets. Everything now has a time to live. Everything is ephemeral. You can request a credential for 5 minutes, and then you don't have to worry about it, because after 5 minutes, Vault will terminate that credential. Okay, and finally, encryption as service and data protection. So Vaults can be the central points of encryption as service in your organization and unify all the encryption operations, no matter which clouds or platforms you're at. Let's talk about a bit HashiCorp Consul, okay? How to achieve network security? First, by using Consul to provide the foundation for tracking and routing secure all the services using service discovery. Second, by enable Consul to be the service mesh and ensure service-to-service interaction. Also everything now is mutually authenticated using MTLS and leveraging Vaults as a PKI engine. Okay, if you are worried about also east-west load balancing and you're deploying loads of load balancing across your internal network, this is very expensive, very hard to maintain, to rotate certificates, etc. And if you have 100 instances of your applications where you have one load balancer in front of them, it doesn't matter. The load balancer is the single point of failure. You can have thousands of instances of one application, but having one load balancer, that's the weak link in the chain. Okay, so you can replace that with a service mesh with a HashiCorp Consul. And finally, authorizing service-to-service interactions using Consul intentions. Okay, we are going to abstract all those spreadsheets full of firewall rules. Okay, and we can also provide explicit layer 4 or layer 7 permissions. So service A can talk to service B, and we create an abstraction for that. Okay, and finally, the last piece of Consul is enabling network infrastructure automation. Let's talk about boundary. Okay, boundary is the cool new kid on the block. Okay, boundary provide access to applications and critical systems with fine-grained authorizations without managing credentials or exposing your network. Okay, basically to authenticate and authorize users to access systems. So now you're working from home. How do you access a production database? In the past, you have to go through a proxy. The proxy leads you into a VPN or a bastion, and then that bastion you SSH into another machine, and then that machine you get some credentials to do something, or you have the credentials in a notebook and then you do everything. Okay, so just imagine you are working from home. Oh, I need to access a production database. Fine, I log into HashiCorp Boundary using SSO. And then Boundary will authorize me directly into the database with dynamic credentials from Vault. So I'm not going to have credentials for that database. My session will be authorized according to my user identity. Okay, and I'm logging using SSO, so I have no static passwords or anything. That can eliminate also bastion servers. And finally, we also have session recording. So this is quite amazing. Okay. So we're going to reduce the risk of leaking credentials with also this dynamic secrets provision by vaults, okay, and also these just-in-time credentials. We are going to automate credential brokering and also securely managing access to services and hosts with a HashiCorp boundary. So yeah, these are pretty much the zero trust use cases, okay, for HashiCorp Vault, Consul, and Boundary. So let's recap a bit on what other factors motivating the accelerated push to the multi-clouds, and also a couple of risks, okay? There are three major challenges facing organizations, okay? The widespread adoption of multi-clouds, okay? As more and more organizations pursue this strategy, because different cloud vendors, they are better at different resources and the pricing is very competitive. We have also the risk of potentially exposing themselves and also the teams to make a mistake as they're expanding to the multi-clouds. Identity as a model is incomplete and unable to function seamless in a fragmented cloud platforms. So again, each cloud has its own workflow and its own way to provision identity. And finally, this will result in a much expanded attack surface that can threaten customer data and intellectual property. Let's take a look also at the MITRE attack framework, okay, to orient ourselves a bit. This is a shared language used by security professionals, okay? Most of you here, maybe you are more proficient on this than I am, okay? But pretty much we're gonna use the MITRE attack framework. And you can see here, attack always flows from left to right. And there are much more tactics than the ones we're seeing here, okay? But we're gonna consider just those 5 as the most critical, okay? So how zero trust security with HashiCorp can help us to mitigate these challenges here, okay? So first, initial access, okay? Initial access represents the stage when a person, an actor, or a system is trying to get into your network, okay? The most common entry point is credential leaks. So according to IBM cost of data breach report of 2022, leaking credentials is responsible for over 20% attacks, okay? Static secrets work well until they don't. Okay, until you have to manage them. If you have cloud credentials and people are seeing those credentials, they can copy and paste those credentials. They have a manual process. You have the classic secret sprawl challenge. Okay, it's best to avoid using static secrets. Okay, and having a rotation solution can be very burdened for yourselves. Okay. And protecting against credential leakage can prove to be very difficult in the multi-clouds. Okay, so that's why we have boundary and vaults working together to safeguard against initial access attacks. Vault secures access to infrastructure resources by controlling access to target credentials based on their client identity, and boundary securely monitors and manages the user sessions that those credentials are used to create. Next one is privilege escalation, okay? Is a stage where an adversary is trying to attempt to gain higher level permissions, okay? So participants in the Sun's Cloud Security Server on 2019 reported experiencing privilege escalation attacks in pretty much all their attacks, okay? So the threat actors, they will search for high privileges tokens to grant them admin or root privileges, okay? So how can we also mitigate that? Using vault dynamic secrets. Okay, that will make very difficult for actors to escalate their privileges. Vault has a unique ability to create, rotate, and revoke secrets on the fly. These dynamic secrets can be generated on demand. Okay, so they don't exist until we ask them to. Okay, so we're gonna provide just-in-time credentials, and they are short-lived. We are able also to revoke access anytime as a break-glass procedure. And also these will all be parts of a least privilege strategy. So everything is tied to a policy that will grant the least privilege access as we generate a credential. Next challenge in the MITRE attack is credential access. Is when people are trying to steal account names and passwords. Okay, so the Verizon 2021 reports found that the stolen or lost passwords were using 80% of the breaches. This is very scary. Okay, while it may be tempting to store sensitive credentials unencrypted, doing so will provide attackers the keys to the kingdom, basically. Okay, so if you're also using Kubernetes, there's a lot of challenges, okay, to store credentials. And also, if you're using a Kubernetes secrets, it's basically an encrypted directory somewhere, okay. So Vault, okay, can act as a secret storage to protect against attacks involving credential access. We have a KV store, okay, that people can quickly store secrets and retrieve them using their identity. And workflows can be orchestrated with store secrets for creation of also dynamic credentials, certifying transactions, and privilege access management. Okay, there's also the Vault agents that can also broker credentials and automatically inject KV store secrets into applications without any intervention. And finally, lateral movement, okay, is a critical piece of any attack when adversary is trying to move through your network. So they're pretty much jumping from box to box. Okay, so the VMware Global Incident Response Threats on 2020 reported a 62% rate of recorded lateral movements and also attempts when there's a breach in the network. Okay, so when you arm yourself with high-level credentials and the ability to exploit these resources connected, so this is one of the biggest moves, and also the surface area of attack speaks by itself. When you have bastion servers, you have VPNs, you have a lot of things that people can touch. Okay, so Vault and Consul seamlessly integrates towards lateral movements. Whenever a new service comes online, a TLS certificate is needed to establish connectivity with the rest of the mesh. Okay, to establish and accept connection to and from other services, MTLS connection is required. And this is accomplished through the client service verifying the destination and also the service certificates across the internal CA bundle. Okay, once the connection handshake succeeds, communications are encrypted and authorized. In this case, Vault can act as an issuer and rotator of these certificates, so you don't have to worry about anything about manually changing certificates. And this will add also another layer of protection. So basically, a Consul service mesh, you pretty much mitigate that challenge. And finally, the most scary one, data exfiltration. Okay, this is the combination of any cyber attack, is the ability to extract information. Okay, in the past, there was the ransomware attacks that they were just encrypting your data, but now they're also exfiltrating your data. And the average cost of a data breach, I think reaches on the figure of $4 to $35 million US dollars, according to IBM. Storing data in plain text provides attackers the access to any sensitive company information, and they're going to exploit that for monetary gain. Okay, not encrypting data in transits and in rests makes it very easy for people to extract data with little effort. And that's why we have HashiCorp, Vault, and Consul. Okay, they work together to secure organization from exfiltration attacks. Consul will provide network communication protection through continuous verification and authorization, and Vault will provide encryption as service. If an attacker tries to brute force into your network, even if they can hop into the disks where the data resides, they're gonna only see encrypted information. Okay, so you have to ensure your data, whether in rest and in transit, is protected. Okay, so this is clear how HashiCorp boundary vault Consul enable organizations to reduce an attack surface, incorporating the zero trust security principles. Every step in the way of attacker path, they will encounter a layer defense in-depth solution to make their objective very difficult to accomplish. So yeah, this is pretty much how the three products they are gonna protect against those attacks. Okay, sorry if it was a lot of slides, and ultimately we know security. Okay, many of the things we discussed today on the slides are fundamentally built into the solutions from the day one. 80% of the companies who have experienced massive breaches, ultimately they became Vault consumers. Okay, so we have loads of integrations also. Our products, they have out-of-the-box integrations, but they are basically API driven. If we also use Terraform, you know that we have more than 2,000 providers. So we are cloud agnostic. We are also platform agnostic, and the solutions and products that I showed today can integrate with any cloud and platform. So this is over to you, Connor, to talk about the next steps.
Fabulous. Thank you, Andre, and thank you, Ben. So in terms of next steps, we've got 3 outlined here that we think would be most appropriate for you in terms of further knowledge sharing around zero trust security. So the first of those, if you're based in the UK, is our Zero Trust Strategy Day taking place next Thursday, the 26th of January in London. That will be taking place at the Shangri-La at the Shard. And we have the pleasure of welcoming our field CTO, Sarah Poland, to that event. We'll also be joined by Microsoft, who will be talking about our integrations with Azure and ultimately their view of the world and how they're helping customers implement a zero trust security strategy as well. The second is in terms of if you are managing a team of developers or practitioners yourselves and you want to have your team members become enabled on how to use the HashiCorp tools, whether it's Vault, Consul, Boundary, Terraform, any of the products that you've seen today, we can organize a private workshop for you and your team, as I say, to get enabled on how to best use the tools that we have available in supporting your move towards zero trust. And the third call to action is around getting started on our tools. So we found that the most straightforward and the easiest way to get started on those tools that you've seen today is through our HashiCorp Cloud Platform, or HCP. Those are all available as a service through click button deployments through the SaaS offerings that we have. And as I say, you can get started through the HCP HashiCorp Cloud Platform today if you wanted to. So all of the links that you see on the screen there will be shared via email within the next 24 hours. And just to conclude today's session, we have had a number of questions come through from the audience. So as a reminder, if you do have any yourselves, please post those in the Q&A chat at the bottom of your screen. But just to get started, Ben, perhaps a question for you. What are the biggest challenges you see at the moment with implementing a zero trust security strategy?
Honestly, Connor, from talking to our customers in the public sector domain, the single biggest challenge that people face is skills and capabilities. That talent and attraction and retention piece that I alluded to earlier is the thing that keeps coming up over and over again when we talk to our public sector customers. Indeed, some of our customers have told us, that they have like 40 to 50% of their headcount still looking to fill in the technical space because they just cannot attract and then keep the talent that they require to successfully orchestrate those cloud adoption programs, and zero trust combined within that.
Fabulous, thank you. And I guess kind of related to that as well, another question that we've had is that transitioning to zero trust sounds like a lot of work. I'm wondering if companies have hired people with previous experience with Vault or zero trust models, or do you see teams learning everything by themselves and on their own?
In my experience, we've seen a lot of teams learning by themselves, where they've been given a leg up, but potentially by our professional services teams, to get them started, get them on that pathway to success. But usually it's the internal teams taking over and running with that program of work to get them to that zero trust goal.
Great, thank you, Ben. And I think that's all the questions that we've had today. So again, a huge thank you to both Andre and to Ben for your presentations today. And with that, we'll conclude today's session. So if you do want to learn more about zero trust security or HashiCorp, then you could see the next steps on the screen. And if, as a reminder, you do want access to the recording and to the slides that we've shared, we'll be sending those out via email within the next 24 hours. And so with that, I really hope you enjoyed today's session. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.